The Widow, episode 30. A year after the death of her beloved husband, Beatrice, the cold-hearted widow, finally felt a slight thawing in her soul. The mysterious and charming Ricardo won her over with every glance, every gesture. But this newfound happiness was a fragile flame threatened by a sinister shadow. The deceased's brother, Eduardo, watched everything, his dark eyes full of hatred and possession. He had sworn that Beatrice would never love another man, and he was willing to do anything to prevent her happiness from blossoming. An anonymous phone call, an enigmatic message. Danger approached, silent as a serpent. Beatrice was about to discover that true revenge was not in her past, but in her present. It was night. A dark night, the kind that seems to swallow the stars, leaving only the pale, watchful moon in the sky. Beatrice, the widow, was in her room, the soft scent of lavender trying to mask the more intense fragrance of the pain that still inhabited her. A year since the love of her life, her husband had gone, leaving an emptiness that echoed in every corner of her house. But something was different. A gentle warmth, like a timid ray of sunshine, had begun to melt the ice that imprisoned her heart. It was Ricardo. He was like a warm wind in a harsh winter, bringing with him the promise of a new dawn. His dark eyes, full of admiration and respect, looked at her as if she were the most beautiful of flowers, the most precious of jewels. Ricardo was everything she thought she didn't want anymore: affection, tenderness, a shoulder to cry on, and a smile that warmed her soul. They actually smiled, a smile she herself hadn't realized was so bright, so hopeful. She had allowed herself to dream again, an almost forbidden thing, an act of rebellion against her own sadness. But this happiness was a delicate flower, at the mercy of a treacherous wind. The shadow of Eduardo, the brother of her deceased husband, loomed over her, dark and menacing. Eduardo, with his eyes that seemed to burn with fury, did not admit that Beatrice could love again, that she could be happy without him. He loved her, had always loved her, and the idea of another person stealing her brother's place in her heart was unbearable. A phone call. The shrill sound of the phone cut through the silence of the night like a cry of warning. Beatrice answered with her heart pounding in her chest. The voice on the other end was thin, almost inaudible, but laden with a subtle threat. "You mustn't forget what happened," the voice hissed, and then a click, silence, disconnection. Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. Who was it? What did this person want? The message arrived minutes later. An old photograph, faded by time, but clear enough to show Ricardo's face, young, very young, and beside him, a woman with a radiant smile that Beatrice immediately recognized, the woman Ricardo had dated in the past, the woman he had abandoned for obscure reasons. Beatrice clenched her fist tightly, feeling a pang of jealousy, an unfamiliar sensation that left her disoriented and scared. Was it jealousy or was it fear? The fear of losing the happiness she was finally beginning to feel. A wave of anguish washed over Beatrice. Was Ricardo a trustworthy man? Was this relationship so fragile, a house of cards about to collapse? She thought of Eduardo, the constant shadow that followed her, and suddenly the photo and the message took on a new perspective. Was it possible that Eduardo was behind all this? That he was plotting a trap to separate her from Ricardo? The idea seemed so absurd that for a moment she even felt relieved. But immediately afterward, a feeling of imminent danger filled her. The night became an ally of insecurity. Beatrice felt enveloped in a web of uncertainties, where every shadow seemed to hide a danger and every silence whispered dark secrets. She felt trapped in a game of cat and mouse, where she was the mouse, and the players, Ricardo and Eduardo, were more cunning than she could imagine. She looked at the photo, at Ricardo's bright smile and the woman beside him, and the sweet promise of happiness now seemed a distant glimmer on the horizon. Doubts corroded her soul, and fear, like a poisonous plant, began to sprout in her heart. She knew she needed to discover the truth before her newfound happiness was snatched from her hands, before the darkness swallowed her again. The decision, the arduous and complex decision, was to find out everything about Ricardo, to be sure of his innocence, or to prepare for her most painful disappointment. And in this cruel game, Eduardo was a key piece. The darkness intensified, and fear, doubt, became the stage for the next phase of this exciting story. The future, uncertain and unpredictable, was about to reveal its cards, and Beatrice, the widow, needed to be ready to play. It was night, a dense and oppressive night, as if the sky itself were conspiring against Beatrice's fragile happiness. The scent of lavender, which usually calmed her, now only highlighted the fragility of her feelings. The image of Ricardo, with his tender eyes, struggled against the memory of the photo, the image of that woman beside him. A smile as radiant as hers was now uncertain and hesitant. That smile that caused her a pang of jealousy, something completely new and frightening. She didn't know if it was jealousy or just fear. Fear of losing the only ray of sunshine that had broken through the darkness of her soul since the loss of her beloved husband. Beatrice picked up her cell phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Ricardo's number. With each ring, her heart beat faster, as if it were announcing the final judgment of her new love. Would he answer? What would he say? She was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, at the mercy of her own insecurity. The phone rang 3 times before Ricardo answered, his calm, soft voice contrasting with the storm brewing inside her. He seemed to sense her anguish, her hesitation, from her trembling, hesitant voice. He asked what was wrong, and she, unable to articulate words, just cried. Ricardo, realizing the seriousness of the situation, suggested they meet. He would go to her. The promise of his presence, the possibility of a comforting hug, brought her some calm, but the shadow of doubt persisted like an indelible stain on the screen of her thoughts. The anonymous message and the photo echoed in her mind, a macabre symphony of uncertainties and fears. While waiting for Ricardo, Beatrice decided to confront Eduardo. The idea occurred to her like a bolt of lightning. The possibility of Eduardo being behind all this, of manipulating the circumstances to prevent her happiness, seemed increasingly plausible. She knew that Eduardo was capable of cruel acts, of implacable manipulations, to get what he wanted. And what did he want? Beatrice. Forever, she found him in front of her house, his face contorted, his eyes burning with a dark and desperate passion. She felt a shiver run down her spine and a pang of fear mixed with anger. She confronted Eduardo, throwing her suspicions, her doubts at him. Eduardo didn't deny anything, he just stared at her, his forehead wrinkled, showing his disappointment and his ferocious hatred. He confessed that he had sent the message and shown her the photo, but claimed it was just a warning, a harbinger of the disappointment that awaited her. He said that Ricardo was an unscrupulous man, a sentimental swindler. He would use her broken heart to win her over, and then discard her as if she were an old and useless object. The argument was intense, full of accusations and denials. Beatrice was torn between distrust and hope. She felt like a puppet manipulated by the strings of passion, hatred, revenge. Was Eduardo lying? Was Ricardo really as bad a man as Eduardo painted him to be? Eduardo's words echoed in her ears, mingling with Ricardo's sweet voice, which at that moment arrived. Ricardo, upon arriving and encountering the tense situation, observed the exchange of words between Eduardo and Beatrice, their faces contorted by anger and despair. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Beatrice, who, lost in her doubts, didn't know which man to believe. Ricardo extended his hand, seeking to comfort her, but uncertainty imprisoned her and made her hesitate. The trust, so recently found, shattered like glass. And in Beatrice's eyes, Ricardo saw a reflection of his own fear, and realized that his happiness was as fragile as a flower petal in the middle of a storm. The night continued dark, and the destiny of the two lovers unpredictable and tense. The fight for her heart, a battlefield where truth and lies intertwined, was only just beginning. Uncertainty hung in the air, dense and threatening, like a dark fog promising a cloudy future. It was night. A night so dark that it seemed to have swallowed all the stars, leaving only the pale, watchful moon like a silent witness to the drama unfolding. Beatrice, the widow, was in her room, the soft scent of lavender fighting in vain against the more intense fragrance of her anguish. A year since the love of her life had left her, leaving an emptiness that echoed in every corner of her house. But this emptiness, little by little, was being filled by a gentle warmth, a timid ray of sunshine that Ricardo had brought into her life. He was like a balm for her wounded soul, a safe harbor in the midst of the storm of her sadness. His eyes looked at her with an admiration that melted the ice that imprisoned her heart. Beatrice had allowed herself to dream again, to feel again, an almost rebellious act against her own sadness. But this happiness was fragile, a delicate flower at the mercy of a treacherous wind. The shadow of Eduardo, the brother of the deceased, loomed over her, dark and menacing. Eduardo, with his eyes burning with hatred, did not admit that Beatrice could love again, that she could be happy without him. He loved her, had always loved her, and the idea of another person stealing her brother's place in her heart was unbearable to him. He was a storm about to explode. Ricardo, upon arriving and seeing the tense scene between Beatrice and Eduardo, their faces contorted by anger and despair, approached slowly. He extended his hand to Beatrice, his eyes showing concern. Beatrice, undecided, observed Ricardo's face and Eduardo's, trying to decipher the truth. Fear, uncertainty, anguish were fighting within her. At that moment, Ricardo embraced her gently, a calm and affectionate gesture that comforted her. Ricardo knew how strong Beatrice was, but also that she was vulnerable. He knew that she was being manipulated by fear and doubts. Ricardo, patiently, explained to Beatrice about the past, about the photo and the anonymous message. He confessed to having known the woman in the photograph years ago, but that he had ended the relationship because, at that time, he was not ready for a serious relationship. He had loved Beatrice from the first time he saw her, and the woman in the photo had become a weight of the past. With Ricardo's sincerity and tenderness, the truth came to light. Beatrice realized that Eduardo was acting out of jealousy and obsession, using her pain and fragility to manipulate her. He had invented a plot to separate them, driven by a sick and possessive passion. The truth liberated Beatrice like a bird finally finding freedom. She understood that the fear that haunted her was not of Ricardo, but of the past, of the ghost of pain that Eduardo was trying to revive in her heart. Eduardo, seeing that his manipulation had failed, became enraged. He tried to attack Ricardo, but Beatrice placed herself in front of him. The strength she had shown in her gaze and in her attitude surprised everyone. She had finally overcome her grief, and her willpower was more imposing than ever. Eduardo, defeated, unable to achieve his goals, withdrew, promising revenge. But Eduardo's threat no longer had the same power over Beatrice. She was strengthened by her love for Ricardo and her own courage. At that moment, the moon, which had been a silent witness to the drama, seemed to shine more intensely, as if celebrating the victory of love over hate, hope over despair. The night was still dark, but the happiness of Beatrice and Ricardo, now strengthened by overcoming, radiated its own light, capable of dispelling the densest darkness. They embraced, sealing their love with a passionate kiss, the harbinger of a new beginning, of a life together. Free from the shadows of the past and the threats of the future, Beatrice, the widow, had found peace, happiness, and love again. She had been reborn from the ashes of her pain, stronger and more determined than ever. The story of Beatrice and Ricardo was a testament that love can indeed flourish even amidst pain, loss and betrayal, an act of resistance against the darkness. And so, amidst the pale glow of the moon, the widow and her love surrendered to the dreams of a bright and promising future. The end.